Hello, everyone. Thanks all for joining me again. Today, I'm continuing a series that I left off a little while ago on the Christian foundation and the Christian fabric of America. America was founded on Christian principles. They're Christian terms that are part and parcel of the American founding documents and also explicit in the founding fathers. And of course, we know that revisionists are wanting to remove any evidence of Christian history to America. But this is really a false tale. The evidence is overwhelming. And today I am joined by, actually, this guy just popped up in the live stream. I was busy sitting here. Next thing you know, this guy pops up. I don't know who he is. If anyone knows who this man is, please send me a name. Let me know, because he just showed up here. But he's been friendly and pleasant, so I thought I'd keep him. And Paul, you're frozen on my screen again.
Oh boy, that's because I
you're
was looking at. I think it has to do with me trying to share out the screen. Yeah, share out the view.
Okay, well,
this page. That's why I think I freeze.
Okay, yeah, but maybe, yeah. Well, unfortunately, it does that. But yeah, thanks for joining me, Paul. And so, everyone, this is Paul Sutcliffe. I know who he is. So this is Paul Sutcliffe. He's been a regular guest on the channel. Very, very well-educated man. Very knowledgeable of Islam, about the Muslim Brotherhood, about the Sharia, and he once gave a book to President Trump. Do you want to tell us that story, Paul? And thanks for joining us.
Well, Trump was running for president at the it's CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Group that gets together. It was 2015, and I had finished a book called Civilization, Jihad, and the Myth of Modern Islam. And he was sitting there, he was standing there shaking everybody's hand. So I handed him a book, and I think he's read it. And since after that, he actually, I've written another piece in respect to what to do about something. And he pretty much either quoted that or had good people. I'm not sure either way, but as long as there was something important that needed to be done, and he did it. And I think that was getting rid of a certain group. He got rid of it, and of course it got put back after Biden got in. So yes.
One has to wonder about that. Why would you, as we've discovered, US aid has been giving literally billions of dollars to Hamas. Something like, what, $8 billion now at last count?
Well, we actually have come up to the figure of 18 billion spent on terrorist countries. I actually have the stats. Just a second. I can tell you the exact.
American taxpayers are funding their own demise and the demise of the West. It is shocking. Yes. And there was no restriction placed on these people at Treasury and USAID and so on. They were not to deny any funding, no matter who it went to. Crazy.
That's the scary part, because this makes no sense that they have this much independence, because all of these should have congressional oversight. And USAID has, I call it USAID, has refused congressional oversight. That's my best way to explain the problem. So here's how bad it was. They sent $600 million to Pakistan, $3.7 billion to Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover, $2.1 billion to the PLO and Hamas after October 7th, and $3.4 billion to Yemen, whose Houthi regime we're currently at war with. Oh, and better yet, we spent $2.3 billion on Ilhan Omar's Somalia in the last 2 years, with a total of $3.3 billion spent in the last 5 years. That's a total of $18.5 billion on Islamic terror states over the last 5 years.
Has he been fired out of a cannon back to Somalia yet?
Well, there's a good chance that she may be arrested at this point, because they're looking into several laws that she's violated.
Yeah. But yeah, well, I agree there's some problems there, but discussion for another time. We can come back to this, because I think there's a lot to discuss. But let's dive into our presentation. And today we're talking about the Christian founding of America. And yeah, so let's pick this up. This is part 6. It's been a while, and I do hope Ilhan Omar gets arrested, especially for immigration fraud, and we all know what she did. So Yeah, so my plan is to go to slide number 131, and I'm on slide 109. So do you want to add anything before we go further, Paul? Anything on this
No,
particular?
I'm looking forward to see how this see what you have here.
Yeah, so to remind you all, we've gone through all of the founding fathers, not just the main ones, but many of them that you may not have heard of. And we've also looked at certain claims that are the basis of assertions that America was not a Christian nation. It had no Christian founding. It was pagan. It was atheist. It was, you pick your false claim here. And we've discovered the basis for a lot of these, including the claim regarding the Treaty of Tripoli, which turns out to be a complete farce and a complete fraud. But yeah, so let's talk about Charles Carroll of Carrollton. So he lived from 1737 to 1832. He was a very prominent American statesman, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, born into a wealthy Catholic family in Maryland. He became one of the leading figures in the early history of the US. He advocated for independence from British rule. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress. What exactly is the Continental Congress, Paul?
So the Continental Congress originally it was a goal. The goal of the Continental Congress, they got together and they started talking about things like independence. And then when they decided to go for independence, then it became a goal of creating their own government. So they were that was a huge problem. And you got to think about the travels back then. So it would take a long time for people to get from one place to the other. It would take about a month for some people to get there. That's kind of a mind number when you think about travel today.
Yeah, it's so easy to get anywhere these days, which would have taken weeks, days, and months in the past. Incredible. Yeah. So he was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence and one of the last surviving signers. Now, he served in the Maryland State Senate, was also a member of the First Congress of the US, and his legacy includes a very strong emphasis on religious freedom and his family's influence in the Maryland political landscape. And his family's estate, Carrollton, is a significant historical landmark in the region. And he is quoted to have said, "Without morals, a republic cannot subsist any length of time." And notice, I believe Jefferson also said it, this is a constitution for a moral people. And they all meant Christian morality. They didn't mean Buddhist morality. Well, would you agree, Paul? That I'm vaguely on point?
There was no concept of Buddhism. It's an interesting point when you actually look at Christian history and you look at the word religion. Anytime it's actually used, the word religion is actually used during the 1600s, 1700s,
Christianity.
pretty much 1500. It's 100% used for Christianity. It's never used for anything else. So it's a good question. Yes.
Yeah. Although if you read through some of these, I mean, if you read through people talking about it, they say, well, you see, it actually doesn't refer specifically and explicitly to Christianity. So it really could be the Ubangi religion, where it's a requirement and a sacrament to put a bone through your nose. You're like, huh? You know, because
Yeah, go find. I love reading old books. I have my own collections. Yeah, I have a good collection of books from the 1700s and 1800s. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was a pervasive thing. I mean, Christianity was pervasive in literature and art, in architecture, and it was exactly what people were thinking of. So he says, without morals, a republic cannot subsist any length of time. They therefore who are decrying the Christian religion, whose morality is so sublime and pure, and which ensures to the good eternal happiness, are undermining the solid foundation of morals, which is the best security for the duration of free government. Incredible. I mean, there's amazing quotes by these fathers, by all of these people, and and like the apostles, most of them died to defend their principles. Incredible. And these are based on Christian principles. It's incredible. And he says, grateful to Almighty God. Now, of course, an argument can be made, I guess, by some fool in the chat that he's referring to Buddha. True story, right?
Yeah. If you think Buddha has to do with God, yeah, you don't know much about Buddhism.
And Buddha was an atheist, and his followers worship him. So crazy stuff. So grateful to Almighty God for the blessings which, through Jesus Christ our Lord, He had conferred on my beloved country in her emancipation, and on myself in permitting me, under circumstances of mercy, to live to the age of 89 years, and to survive the 50th year of independence, adopted by Congress on the 4th of July, 1776. So very Christian words there from another of the founding fathers, and very explicitly Christian, talking about the country founded on Christian principles, and Christianity being the source of its freedom in government, of its religious liberty, and of the liberty of all people. Any comment, Paul?
No, it's exciting to hear somebody this. I think it's unusual you hear about somebody being 89 years old that far back. So it would have been like an extra 20 or maybe 20 years that you don't normally hear of back then. It's not unusual for you to find somebody's in 80s and 90s today. There's just a whole slew of people that old now, but back then it was very rare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Villainous says secularism takes advantage of the assumed Christianity in such statements by just saying morals. You can later on ignore Christianity and use any basis for morals. True.
Yeah,
so let's continue.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work for this country in that time period. It doesn't work.
No. And of course, you can try Muslim morals, but there's no such thing in Islam.
No, there's nothing.
So,
nothing
Jonathan,
moral.
Go on. Sorry.
There's nothing moral in Islam.
No.
If you accept their concept of morality, you're going to be sleeping with a little girl.
Yes. Jonathan Trumbull, as governor of Connecticut, in official proclamation, the examples of holy men teach us that we should seek him with fasting and prayer, with penitent confession of our sins, and hope in his mercy through Jesus Christ, the great Redeemer. And this is in the proclamation for a day of fasting and prayer, March 9, 1774. And these were government proclamations. We've discussed these in previous episodes. Samuel Chase, Chief Justice of Maryland, 1799, wrote, "By our form of government, the Christian religion is the established religion. There shall be no establishment of religion." But hold on, he's saying here, Chief Justice, Christianity is the established religion. We've discussed before how these words have been twisted and eventually turned completely upside down by a corrupt judiciary. But Christianity is, effectively speaking, the established religion in the United States. Just that no particular denomination can stand supreme. However, this doesn't mean that other religions are equally valid. Comment, Paul, on this established religion?
Yes, there was no. I mean, you don't get Buddhism. You don't get anything here until mid to late 1800s, and that's something important to grasp. They did get some other things that came in through the slave trade, but Islam was not one of them, because the people who were sold by the Muslims to the people claiming to be Christians.
Yeah, we'll have a look at Islam versus America soon in this talk, and it's crazy that Hussein Obama would say things like, "Islam is part of the fabric of America." You're like, huh? Part of the founding of America? Yeah, it's the founding of America's first war. Yeah, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 1824, Christianity, general Christianity, is and always has been part of the common law. Not Christianity founded upon any particular religious tenets, not Christianity with an established church, but Christianity with liberty of conscience to all men. So no particular denomination could be supreme above any other, but Christianity is considered to be what is foundational to America. Massachusetts Constitution, and every denomination of Christians, demeaning themselves peaceably and as good subjects of the Commonwealth, shall be equally under the protection of the law, and no subordination of any sect or denomination to another shall ever be established by law. And then Samuel Adams, governor of Massachusetts, in the proclamation for a day of fasting and prayer, we may with one heart and voice humbly implore his gracious and free pardon through Jesus Christ, supplicating his divine aid above all to cause the religion of Jesus Christ in its true spirit to spread far and wide till the whole earth shall be filled with his glory. Any comments, Paul, before I go on?
No, it's exciting to think about. I mean, people don't realize that the government would do this. In fact, if you go to Connecticut and you actually look at the government house, or the government building for the government, I think it's the government headquarters, the state headquarters, you'll find all of the statues and beautiful handiwork done. It's just beautiful stonework done on the outside of the building that all represents Christianity. It's probably one of the most beautiful buildings. And I actually went and somebody gave me a nice tour of this place, pointing out all the great Christians that had been highlighted there. They were great Christian men and who had done various things to stand. And that's just one of the buildings I've seen like that.
Mm-hmm. Then it says separation of church and state is what the communists in Russia said, because that's what Marx wrote. That's what Marx wanted, separation of church and state. That is a communist requirement. In fact, separation of church and state is not in the US Constitution. I'm going to talk about it in this talk if we get that far. It's actually something that was said, I believe, by George Washington. And of course, opportunists are going to seize upon these things and try to twist them to their own ends. So Judge Nathaniel Freeman, 1802, instructed Massachusetts grand juries as follows. The laws of the Christian system, as embraced by the Bible, must be respected as of high authority in all our courts. They must have known something that modern Americans don't. Our government, originating in the voluntary compact of a people who in that very instrument profess the Christian religion. Interesting, who in that very compact. So in the Constitution, he says that the government originates in the compact of people who in the would he be referring here to the Constitution, profess the Christian religion? What voluntary compact is he speaking of?
1802 compact. Mayflower.
I'm just thinking, what
compact.
Instrument is he referring to? This is the Constitution, but yeah, let's worry about that later. But he says in that we profess the Christian religion, it may be considered not as Republic Rome was, a pagan, but we are a Christian republic.
Yeah, if you go back to the Mayflower Compact, if you come forward in time, the Constitution could be referred to that in that same manner. It's clear if you actually read the Constitution, there's no denying that Christ and Jesus is in the Constitution, referred to over and over again. You can read that even in the Articles of Confederation. You can find it. There's no denying that this place is a Christian country based on its founding and its founding documents.
Yeah, actually, hold on. Let me find something because someone thought they were being really, really smart. Let me just bring up a comment that someone else made here. This was, I think she's being very intelligent. I wrote here, let's explore the Christian foundation, discover the founding fathers influenced the nation's government, culture, and identity, challenging the common yet false narrative of their secularism. Right? So I made a tweet about this, and some rando, literally some rando, where are the explicit references to Christianity in America's founding documents? This will be a simple question to answer if your claim is true. I never said that the founding documents state so explicitly. I never said that up here, not once.
No, you actually read them. They're going to talk about, I mean, every reference, you talk about the benevolence of God.
Yeah.
They're all implicitly Christian, yes.
Yeah. And then I said I did not claim the US government is explicitly Christian. I discussed the influence of Christianity on its foundation, culture, and identity. And this differs from your misrepresentation. However, the founding documents and writings of the founding fathers do contain references to God. Engage with the real argument, not a distorted version I told him. But moving on. Yeah. Josiah Bartlett, governor of New Hampshire, in an official proclamation urged to confess before God their aggravated transgressions and to implore his pardon and forgiveness through the merits of mediation of Jesus Christ, that the knowledge of the gospel of Jesus Christ may be made known to all nations, pure and undefiled religion universally prevail, and the earth be filled with the glory of God. Fascinating. So just more quotes from people from that era. Chief Justice James Kent of New York, 1811. And this is in a court ruling. Whatever strikes at the root of Christianity tends manifestly to the dissolution of civil government. So you see corruption destroying the government, destroying society when Christianity is attacked. We are a Christian people, and the morality of the country is deeply engrafted upon Christianity. Christianity, in its enlarged sense as a religion revealed and taught in the Bible, is part and parcel of the law of the land.
And this is one of the reasons why you'll find that the United States was very highly literate for a long, long time. The reason, if you become a Christian, you need to read the Bible, which means you need to read. So you're going to want to read the Bible, and this is this is one of the reasons they can say that. People wanted to become literate so they could read the Bible, and now that all this information gets shared, and none of this would have happened without what we call the Great Awakening. And that's another undeniable thing that likes to get denied. You couldn't have had, there was no way the revolution would have ever happened here without the Great Awakening.
Right. I mean, there were few people realize there were two enlightenments. There was the French atheist pagan enlightenment, which was genocidal to the extreme, and you had the Christian enlightenment, which the American Revolution is founded upon that. Now, George Washington, just like people are attacking people like undermining Winston Churchill today, for instance, there were attacks made back then upon George Washington. Let's have a look at that. So in George Washington, The Image and the Man of 1926, a man called W.E. Woodward attacked his character, creating a skeptical, non-religious view of George Washington. To the contrary, in a letter dated January 10, 1859, Nathaniel Hewitt recalled an experience highlighting Washington's faithful Christian devotional habits. Oddly enough. And he writes here, in the month of November 1829, I was in Fredericksburg, Virginia, in the family of the Reverend Mr. Wilson, pastor of the Presbyterian Church in that place. He occupied the house in which the mother of Washington lived and died. Mr. Wilson informed me that a nephew of Washington, Captain Lewis, who had been his clerk and had the charge of his books and papers and was daily in his library until his death, related to him the following occurrence. It was the custom or the habit of Washington to retire to his library every evening at 9 o'clock. And although he had visitors, he invariably left at that hour and did not return. He remained alone in his library till 10 o'clock and passed into his bedchamber by an inner door. Captain Lewis had long wondered how he spent that hour, knowing that he wrote nothing and that the books and papers were as he left them the preceding day. During a violent storm of wind and rain, and when there were no visitors, he crept in his stocking feet to the door, and through the keyhole he beheld George Washington on his knees with a large book open before him, which he had no doubt was a Bible, a large one being constantly in the room. And that's Morris, Civil Institutions of the United States, pages 501 to 502. I mean, really interesting that somehow George Washington was actually a worshiper of the moon goddess Isis or something, right, Paul?
No, not a chance. No, that man could pray.
Right. So let's look at George Washington. The man must be bad indeed who can look upon the events of the American Revolution without feeling the warmest gratitude towards the great author of the universe, and whose divine interposition was so frequently manifested in our behalf. That's George Washington, letter to Samuel Langdon, September 28, 1789. So, Jefferson likes to think he's intelligent and smart. He's so amazing. Thanks for the stupidity, Jefferson. But really, I'm sure you can't do better than that, even if you tried. But nice try. So, May the same wonder-working deity who long since delivering the Hebrews from the Egyptian oppressors planted them in the promised land, whose providential agency has been conspicuous in establishing these United States as an independent nation, still continue to water them with the dews of heaven and to make the inhabitants of every denomination participate in the temporal and spiritual blessings of that people whose God is Jehovah. And that's a letter to the Hebrew congregation of Savannah, Georgia. Glorious indeed has been our contest, glorious if we consider the prize for which we have contended, and glorious in its issue. But in the midst of our joys, I hope we shall not forget that to divine providence is to be ascribed the glory and praise. Letter to John Rogers from George Washington. Your thoughts?
I mean, there's a lot of references to divine providence in the early 1800s and 1700s, and they're all specifically to the Christian God. They are specifically to Jesus, and it's the concept of the Trinity. This is over and over and over again. You'll find it. I can't even list how many books I've read it in from the time period. It's kind of mind-numbing when you start looking at everybody talking about providence. Even the people who came to review this country to see what the government was like, they talked about this as a huge, huge thing, that where God was involved. People believe God was involved in every aspect of their life. And I'm saddened when I think about how people have no clue today. I mean, you can probably go to a local high school and find a majority of kids who have no idea who Jesus is.
Right. Well, yeah. Just so by the way, Jeshurun, we know of a country, several that are run by Satan. Like you can think of Gaza, Palestine, definitely run by Satan directly. Afghanistan, Pakistan. Yeah. Okay, George Washington. I flatter myself that a superintending providence is ordering everything for the best, and that in due time all will end well. Letter to Landon Carter. And he says, it is not a little pleasing nor less wonderful to contemplate that after 2 years, maneuvering and undergoing the strangest vicissitudes that perhaps ever attended any one contest since the creation of both armies, are brought back to the very point they set out from, and that which was the offending party in the beginning is now reduced to the use of the spade and pickaxe for defense. The hand of Providence has been so conspicuous in all of this that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith. So anyone who lacks faith in God is worse than an infidel, and more than wicked that does not have gratitude enough to acknowledge his obligations to God. But it will be time enough for me to turn preacher when my present appointment ceases, and therefore I shall add no more on the doctrine of providence. Private letter to Brigadier General Thomas Nelson, 1778. Incredible. I mean, so all of these stories I used to be told, or all these atheist claims, and that George Washington was a secularist and didn't believe in God. You can see this. This is all clearly false. And he says, what will be the consequences of arming for self-defense? That Providence, who permits these doings in the disturbers of mankind and who rules and governs all things, alone can tell. To its all-powerful decrees we must submit, whilst we hope that the injustice of our cause, if war must ensue, will entitle us to its protection. So he's asking for God's protection. I mean, this is very ancient, very old language, so tough to comprehend.
Again, the constant referring to providence, you're going to continue to hear this. It's an amazing statement of belief that God is involved in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, so he's not a deist, because deists don't believe that God is involved in the world. Providence believes that God is actively present in the world, working for the good.
Even Benjamin Franklin uses this term. So again, it kind of goes against the concept. Thomas Jefferson uses this term constantly. There's a definite belief. So I don't think deist maybe is a correct or close definition of where certain people fell, because it was just how, I mean, American culture, it was all about God being involved personally in your lives. And that's how it was during this time period. This is part of this. Is the Puritan ethic. basically where you're talking about the work ethic, and they believe that every calling that you could have. What I mean by that is they talk about your calling being towards ministry. Well, the Puritans taught everybody here, look, it doesn't matter what you do for your life. That is God's calling on your life. Okay, so if your job's to be a farmer, that's your calling in life. If your job is, so this is why they believe this so intently. Wherever God had you working or whatever he had you doing, if it was staying home to raising your children, that was where God had you called, and he was intensely interested in working with your life.
Right. And in George Washington, just a few quotes more, and also that we may then unite in most humbly offering our prayers and supplications to the great Lord and ruler of nations, and beseech him to pardon our national and other transgressions. Forgive us for our sins. That's crazy. George Washington's talking about praying to God for forgiveness and enable us all, whether in public or private, to perform our several and relative duties properly. That's his Thanksgiving proclamation, 1789. I now make it my earnest prayer that God would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion. Fascinating. So he had a blessed religion. Without the humble imitation to those whose example in these things, we can never hope to be a happy nation. Washington's circular letter to the states, June 8, 1783. So, and then finally here, whereas it becomes us humbly to approach the throne of Almighty God with gratitude and praise for the wonders which his goodness has wrought in conducting our forefathers to this Western world, and above all that he hath diffused the glorious light of the gospel, whereby through the merits of our gracious Redeemer we may become the heirs of his eternal glory. Washington's General Orders, November 27, 1779. Incredible.
Wow. And that's during the war. That is during the war. And this is the statement of this is a prayer during wartime. So this is exciting.
Yeah. Okay, so George Washington's Providence, number 10. While I reiterate the professions of my dependence upon heaven as the source of all public and private blessings, I will observe that the general prevalence of piety, philanthropy, honesty, industry, and economy seems in the ordinary course of human affairs particularly necessary for advancing and conforming the happiness of our country. And these are all 10 George Washington quotes pointing to God's providence. And during his inauguration ceremony in April 1789, Washington took the oath of office as prescribed by the Constitution, but he added additional religious elements. He summoned the Bible to take the oath upon, and then added the phrase, "So help me God," to the end of the oath, and then leaned over to kiss the Bible, which set a precedent for future presidents.
I don't think they do that anymore. I don't know.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see. Yeah.
So, now talking about the Washington family tomb. So, secular historians ignore George Washington's ward, Nellie Custis, who wrote that doubting his Christian faith was as absurd as doubting his patriotism. When George Washington died in 1799, his remains were placed in a family burial vault that was in a state of disrepair. In his will, Washington directed that a new tomb be constructed at the foot of what is commonly called the Vineyard enclosure. The project was delayed for several years, but in 1831, the remains of George and Martha Washington were moved to their new resting place. Work on the tomb, especially its majestic brick enclosure, were concluded in 1835, and today 25 members of the family rest in the tomb. The plaque on the tomb reads, "I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whoso liveth and believeth in me shall never die." That's John 11, 25 to 26. Sergeant Grinch, personally, I would think that Masons are not the only people to kiss the Bible. I don't think they invented that. I don't think that's unique. It's like saying wearing socks is unique to President Trump. It's that would be pretty arbitrary. So yeah, your thoughts, Paul? I mean, that
The
this is
Masons, I will say this: the Masons had some strict involvement here, but you know, kissing
skipping the Masons.
Bible,
I mean, this quote,
yeah,
and he has this quote on his
yeah.
tomb.
Oh
Well,
no, this is testimony. This is just testimony about what they believed. They do believe that that Jesus. It's so exciting. I am the resurrection and the life, says the Lord. He that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. They know where they're going. That's the testimony.
yeah,
They know where they're
fair,
going. Yeah.
fair point. And his niece, okay, well, he's technically his granddaughter. I think she was adopted. Nellie Custis Lewis wrote that George and Martha Washington were so perfectly united and happy that he must have been a Christian, and that Martha had no doubts and no fears for him as she resigned him without a murmur into the arms of his Savior and his God, with the assured hope of his eternal felicity. Nellie was the wife of Lawrence Lewis, the nephew of Washington who oversaw construction of the tomb. John Marshall, friend and future Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, said, "Without making ostentation professions of religion, Washington was a sincere believer in the Christian faith and a truly devout man." 19th century historian Jared Sparks declared, "To say that George Washington was not a Christian would be to impeach his sincerity and honesty." His contemporaries did not question his Christianity and were convinced of his devout faith as evidenced by the first ever compilation of the true writings of George Washington published in the 1830s, where they talk about that. Catherine M. So, question about the word deist. Deist had a different meaning 200 years ago. Although today, of course, it means like the whole clockwork universe. I mean, that's all part of the Enlightenment and Darwin and so on. But it had a different meaning back then. So yeah, we covered that before. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. It's in the previous episode, I believe. So now this compilation was prepared and published by Jared Sparks, who lived from 1789 to 1866. He was a very well-known writer and historian of the period. He has 12 volumes on the writings of George Washington, 10 on Ben Franklin, and 3 on Gouverneur Morris, who signed the Constitution. He compiled the Library of American Biography, 25 volumes, the Diplomatic Correspondence of the American Revolution, 12 volumes, and the Correspondence of the American Revolution, 4 volumes. He was responsible for approximately 100 historical volumes. He was America's first professor of history, excluding ecclesiastical history, and he taught at the college level in the US and was chosen as president of Harvard. So quite a distinguished man. So let's talk of Washington's gratitude to God. By 1778, Washington had so often witnessed God's intervention that on August 20th, he wrote Thomas Nelson that the hand of providence has been so conspicuous that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith, and more than wicked that has not gratitude enough to acknowledge his obligations. And this is all to God, that doesn't believe in God's providence. Nellie lived with the Washingtons for 20 years, from the time of her birth in 1779 until 99, when she married, and of George Washington's untimely death. She called George and Martha her beloved parents, whom I loved with so much devotion, to whose unceasing tenderness I was indebted for every good I possessed. She was 10 when Washington became president. This is important, why I give you the background. She was very intimately involved with his life. She was 10 when he was president. She traveled with him and walked amidst the great foreign and domestic names of the day. And on his retirement, returned with the family to Mount Vernon. She knew Washington publicly and privately, and Jared Sparks, looking for information on Washington's religious habits, sent Nellie a letter asking if she knew for sure whether Washington was indeed a Christian. And within a week, she replied. So, Sparks included a letter in volume 12 of Washington's writing in the section on Washington's religious habits. And of that letter, Sparks explained, "I shall here insert a letter on the subject, written to me by a lady who lived 20 years in Washington's family, who was his adopted daughter and the granddaughter of Mrs. Washington. The testimony it affords and the hints it contains respecting the domestic habits of Washington are interesting and valuable." So there's a fair amount of truth to that, Hassan. I've spoken about that in the past. So let me get to that. So let me bring up this. Any comments, Paul, so far?
I'm noticing the comment that America was founded by the Freemasons. BS.
Not,
Yes, it is
I think.
BS. That
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
It's just a mess. I've actually heard all this. I've kind of sit there and marvel when I see this. I think it comes down to you have to go back, and this is the importance of what Lloyd is doing here. You have to go back. You have to find some of the original stuff. You know what's fun is you can find the majority of it is easily accessible. So you can go to archive.org. You can go to the National Archives, and you can find many of these things free access and accessible. And it's a joy to find.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to put the whole Washington was not Christian sort of idea to bed, right? So in 1778, George Washington had so often witnessed God's intervention that we've already seen that with Jared Sparks. But then she replies to him. So she writes to him on 26 Feb 1833. Sir, I received your favor of the 20th instant last evening, and hasten to give you the information which you desire. And she says, the parish is the one in which Mount Vernon, Pohick Church, the church where George Washington served as a vestryman. He was a lay minister in the church. Oh my, oh my. And Woodlawn, the home of Nellie and Lawrence Lewis, are situated. Fairfax Parish is now Alexandria. So the term dates vestryman to the late 1600s, a member of an elective body called a vestry in the Anglican Church of the time, and it administered the earthly affairs of the church, and was composed of a group of elected parishioners and the pastor called a rector. So fascinating. So he was involved in the church. And she says, he was very instrumental in establishing Pohick Church, and I believe subscribed, in other words, supported and contributed to largely. So he gave money to the church. His pew was near the pulpit. He had his own private pew. I have a perfect recollection of being there before his election to the presidency with him and my grandmother. He attended the church at Philadelphia, at Alexandria, when the weather and roads permitted a ride of 10 miles, a one-way journey of 2 to 3 hours by horse or carriage. In New York and Philadelphia, he never forgot attendance at church in the morning, unless detained by sickness. The afternoon was spent in his own room at home, the evening with his family and without company. And she goes on, he was not one of those who act or pray that they may be seen of men. He communed with his God in secret. My mother, Eleanor Calvert Lewis, resided 2 years at Mount Vernon after her marriage with John Barr Custis, the only son of Mrs. Washington. I've heard her say that General Washington always received the sacrament with my grandmother before the Revolution. When my aunt, Miss Custis, Martha's daughter, died suddenly at Mount Vernon before they could realize the event, he, General Washington, knelt by her and prayed most fervently, most affectingly for her recovery. So, evidence from his adopted daughter of 20 years that he was a devoutly practicing Christian. Matthew 16:18 says, that he converted to Catholicism. There is evidence for that. There's a discussion around that, but there seems to be some potential foundation to that. But that's not. I may have some notes on that, or I may get to notes on that because I know I did look at that and prepared some notes. But So now they speak of his wife. She had no doubts and no fears for him after 40 years of devoted affection and uninterrupted happiness. She resigned him without a murmur into the arms of his Savior and his God with the assured hope of his eternal happiness. Is it necessary that one should certify General Washington avowed himself to me a believer in Christianity? We may as well question his patriotism, his heroic, disinterested devotion to his country, and his mottos with deeds, not words, and for God and my country. And that's what she wrote to this historian, Jared Sparks. Your thoughts there?
Oh, this is it's a beautiful piece. I was unaware of the possible conversion to Catholicism, but Anglicanism and Anglican Church and Catholic
Very
Church are apart.
And in practice,
few
very
beliefs
close.
don't.
Sorry, Paul, I interrupted.
It's almost exactly 100% the same. So, yeah.
The two services, when you sit between the two services, they're very similar. It's like 95%, pretty much the same in many ways. Yeah, so George Washington's adopted daughter, having spent 20 years of her life in his presence, declared that one may as well question his patriotism as question his Christianity. So yeah, just wanted to make that clear. And U.S. patriotism and divine purpose. As president, Washington was the first major spokesperson and practitioner of American civic religion. And after his death, he became a principal figure in its development. That's in Oxford Academic, Faith and the Presidency from George Washington to George W. Bush by Gary Scott Smith. Interesting. So he became a principal figure in the development of American civil religion. After researching Washington's life, Dr. Tim LaHaye, now I'd say take that name with a little bit of a grain of salt because I think he's written a few odd things. Our first president was a godly man of humble character and sterling commitment to God. William White reports of his sincere piety in Washington's writings. So it's proper to subjoin to this letter what was told to me by Mr. Robert Lewis at Fredericksburg. Being a nephew of Washington and his private secretary during the first part of his presidency, Mr. Lewis lived with him on terms of intimacy and had the best opportunity for observing his habits. Mr. Lewis said he had accidentally witnessed his private devotions in his library both morning and evening. On those occasions, he had seen him kneeling with a Bible open before him, and this was his daily practice. So more confirmation, which is incredible. Any comment, Paul? I mean, because Washington has been the target of a lot of claims that he wasn't a Christian.
I've not heard any here in the United States. I guess I just never heard any that he wasn't a Christian. There was just the traditions we get told. Every child gets told about him and the cherry tree. There's a whole bunch of. I've never yet heard one claim that he wasn't a Christian. I've heard them saying yes, he was highly involved with the Masons, but never any claims that he wasn't a Christian.
Yeah, I've seen many atheists make the claim because they're trying to claim that America was a secular country and purely secular from founding. And I've seen all of these things and it always confused me. So that's why I kind of want to say heavily lean on this. And he said at the end of the Revolutionary War, when the announcement of official peace arrived in America, Washington issued his final sentiments in a letter to the states. And we've already covered this. And he said, recall something of much greater importance and remember the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion. And without imitating him, this is Jesus Christ, we can never hope to be a happy nation. So he's encouraging people here to imitate the example of Christ, which is incredible. And James K. Paulding, Navy Secretary, reports him saying, it is impossible to account for the creation of the universe without the agency of a supreme being. It is impossible to govern the universe without the aid of a supreme being. And then to his brother-in-law, Washington writes, I was favored with your epistle, wrote on 25th of July, when you ought to have been at church, praying as becomes every good Christian man who has as much to answer for as you have. Strange it is that you will be so blind to truth that the enlightening sounds of the gospel cannot reach your ear, nor no examples awaken you to a sense of goodness. If you could but behold with what religious zeal I high, that is to hasten to church on every Lord's day, it would do your heart good and fill it, I hope, with equal fervency. So, strong Christian. And he writes to a church, I readily join with you that while his government protects all in their religious rights, true religion affords the government its surest support. So he sees that government should be founded on religion, and the two work together. And he says that religion and morality are indispensable supports to political prosperity.
You can't have this country the way it's run. It was never meant to be anything but a Christian nation. That's the morality. You can't have these this form of government structure and keep it. This is one of the reasons Reagan says we're only one generation away from losing it. You can't have this governmental structure without Christian morality. It can't survive it.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, hopefully we can sort of show and inspire people to study history, to look at the stories that they're told, to look at the quotes from the words of the people themselves, rather than to take third-party paraphrases. or to listen to atheists or Muslims for that matter who try to corrupt everything, but see that these people founded their country and believe that the country needs to be run under Christian rules, Christian morality. And the whole idea of separation of church and state is not something that is in the Constitution. So you should morally, your law should be based on Christian morals. The example of Jesus Christ should be the example of the American state in drafting its laws and making its decision, running its government. This does not mean theocracy, because Christianity doesn't have a civil law like the Sharia. But this is morals. Christian morals should inform decision making. I mean, would you agree, Paul, that that's a fair sort of a summary that I've made there?
Yes, I've only, this is one of the things I've taught long and for many, many years, that there's no such thing as separation of church and state. You want to go find it in the Communist Manifesto, but you will never, ever find it in the Constitution.
Yeah. Our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. Yeah, like, I don't know, like the LGBTQ FU people, those, thank heavens, those are, but yeah, sadly, right now, there's an LGBTQ genocide ongoing, which is terrible. But, but moving on, let me know when it's done. So, George Washington, and he says here that schools should teach Jesus Christ. This is my last slide on George Washington. And then from George Washington's first official order through his last, he displayed a Christian emphasis. Camped on the banks of a river, Washington was approached by Delaware Indian chiefs who desired that their youths be trained in American schools. Washington's response? He told them that Congress will look on them as their own children. And that is, we would train their children as if they were our own. He then commanded the chiefs for their decision. He said, you do well, or commended the chiefs, sorry. You do well to learn our arts and our ways of life, and above all, the religion of Jesus Christ. These will make you a greater and happier people than you are. Congress will do everything they can to assist you in this wise intention. And then he said, what students would learn in an American school, above all, was the religion of Jesus Christ. That's the important bit to take. George Washington's speech to Delaware Indian chiefs, May 12, 1779, in Fitzpatrick's The Writings of George Washington, volume 15, page 55, published from the government printing office in 1932. Any comment?
I think people forget that this country, when the schools were done, I mean, you were learning how to read by reading the Bible. You were learning how to read. I mean, everything was reading the Bible was so important that it was permeating every form of life. And it's sad that today kids, our schools have nothing with the Bible in it, unless you're going to a private school now. So it's pretty sad.
Did you see Trump speaking at the prayer breakfast? We've got to bring back Christianity. We have to bring back the Bible, bring Jesus back into school, bring Jesus back.
We have Bible clubs starting in schools now, but yeah, it's a fight. It's a huge fight. They have some places where you'll see Bible being taught as a form of literacy, but yeah, they don't want kids to have morals. And that's a scary thought, because then it destroys our governmental structure, because it's only meant to be set up by moral people.
Yeah, but I mean, look, communists have been running the American government for a long time, or infested it.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Same in the UK. Definitely. I mean, I think we've got an overtly communist government running the UK right now.
Definitely socialist. Communist, yeah, they're hateful of their own country. That's what we have here in the United States. The Democrats hate us. They hate the American people.
They hate themselves.
Yeah. It's amusing to watch, because there's so much self-interest. That's the thing that the Christian morality is against, the self-interest. And that's one of the reasons why it was successful for so long. There was more interest in promoting the wealth and health of others than of yourself. And that's a total opposite when you talk about socialism, which claims to be supportive of everyone, but it truly is only for the elite.
Yeah, I mean, they misdefine and misrepresent what is are. But you look at Karl Marx. I mean, Karl Marx he sold his soul to Satan. That's what he tells us he did. And
Yes.
you see the overlap between his scientific atheism and socialism and woke. They are almost the same ideology. It's so near identical. It's insane. Yeah. And of course, you've got this attack on Christianity, and you look at this secular humanism. That's another religion masquerading as supposedly a neutral position, but it's not. It's the secular religion looking to wipe out Christianity in the public sphere, in the civic sphere, and we need to, I think, push back hard against this. We need to expose it for what it is, but also we need to just go back to what was traditional before, what it worked before. Yeah, this is the US proto-Islamic. It's socialism. I mean, socialism is giving way to Islam at this point, but you have socialists in charge. But of course, you've got the Home Office is riddled with Muslims who are serving the purpose of Islam. And yeah, the whole Islamophobia law, I mean, yeah, you've got a government that hates its own people because, I mean, you've got David Lammy wanting to give millions to, what was it, Jamaica? For reparations because, well, I mean, that's where he comes from. He's favoring his own people. He's favoring his own interests. And the Muslims are favoring their own interests. Let me explain to you. Black people, as I've explained to people on my channel many times, this is nothing new. I come from Africa. Black people, if you're white, you need to understand this. Black people hate you. Now, I know you're going to tell me, Lloyd, but not 100% of all black people hate me. Yes, but enough of them hate you, right? So plenty of them hate you, and many of them hate you behind your back. You just don't know that they hate you. You need to hang around black people when you walk away and then listen to the conversation after you've left. You'd be shocked. So look at South Africa, all this talk of the Rainbow Nation, and black people are talking openly about a white genocide, about murdering people. This is open discussion now by political leaders in public. And of course, it's just cultural, traditional discussion. They just really, these are just part of their heritage, and it's okay. But you say, well, as a white person, I'm going to go kill some blacks. You'll be in jail faster than you can blink. So, excuse my French here, but you need to understand these people don't think in your favor. If you come from a white Western background, you need to be looking out for your interests. You need to be defending your interests. You need to stop being tolerant because they are not. These are two wolves looking at the sheep and planning what to have for dinner. Stop being the sheep. Paul, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you can't. I don't know that I would say here in the United States. I don't know. I grew up. There was really no difference, black, white, whatever. So there was the atmosphere I grew up in. There really was no racism.
Yeah, look at the 80s, man. Look at the Rocky movies, Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed. That was good stuff,
Yeah,
I mean,
it was how many of us grew up. And if you look at, if you look at Obama became president, and that pretty much is a testament to you could rise to as high as you wanted to. I think you go back far enough, you'll find the reason why the end of much of this, our first millionaire of African American heritage or Black America, you want to say, was a woman, and she's Madam C.J. Walker was a multi-million. She took it. She was a hard worker. That's all it's ever really taken in the United States to do well, is hard work.
Yeah, no. On this point by Camon, when the British abolished slavery, they paid the debt of every slave within the Commonwealth, black and white. The debt was added to the national debt, paid off by the British people. And that debt was only finished in 2015.
Wow.
So they abolished slavery in 1843, I believe it was, right, officially. And then the Brits decided, as a Christian nation, they were going to abolish slavery worldwide. The Brits lost something like 16,000 sailors because they were buying up the slaves to free them. They were paying for the freedom of these slaves, whether it was blood or treasure. So the Brits went to war where necessary. They fought. They lost at least 16,000 lives, and it took them 100 and how many years? No, it took them 80 plus years to pay off. No, 1843 to 2024. Sorry, it took them nearly 180 years to pay off that debt. Finished. They paid it back in 2015. Now, if you go online today on X, you'll see people saying, well, actually, it doesn't mean anything because they didn't give the money to the slaves. They paid the slave owners. Well, that's who you pay so that these people can be free. Let that teach you, though, that blacks are ingrates. And I say this as a black person. Black people coming from Africa, wherever the heck they come from, are ingrates. They will never be grateful. They will never be thankful, right? Because of the culture teaches them to despise white people. And plenty of them do, enough to tilt the scales. So the thing is that these people are then trying to say, well, you never paid me, I still want my money. Because getting their freedom isn't enough. They don't understand the cost. They don't understand that they were freed and that white people took on this problem. They fought for it, they died for it, they sacrificed for it, they paid for it. And they are never going to be grateful. And at some point, you've got to say, you're an ingrate, enough. As simple as that. You just got to draw a line and say no, because they will guilt you and guilt you and guilt you, and it will never be enough. Any thought?
You see that with social studies teachers today. Yeah, they'll spend their entire year doing U.S. history, and it concentrates entirely on slavery, but they never talk about, that there were black slave owners here in the United States. They owned their own plantations, and they never mention that when they're teaching those children. Yes. One of the largest plantations was owned by a black man. So the first owner of a slave in this country was a black man.
He went to court to force his right to own black slaves.
Yes.
Incredible. Yeah. So, okay. So this Thomas Jefferson. Now I've got 5 more slides, then we will finish, and we're going to talk a little bit about slavery, and we're going to talk a bit on this topic. So in a brief article titled Notes on Religion, written October 1776, Thomas Jefferson summarized his views on the Christian faith. He believed that the human writers were inspired by God, which granted the Bible authority regarding the fundamentals of Christianity. This was 4 months after he penned the Declaration of Independence. Really nicely said. Thomas Jefferson, The Works of Thomas Jefferson, edited by Paul Lester Ford, 12 volumes, pages 254. A few months later, February 1777, Jefferson took a leading role in establishing a new church in Charlottesville. That's what you do when you're an atheist, right? You establish a church in Charlottesville, don't you, Paul?
You establish a church. If you want to share the word, you can go around and share, but yes.
Yeah, it is Anthony Johnson. I've covered him on the channel before. A black man from Angola, the first legal slave owner. He went to court to force a freed slave to be handed back to him to be his slave.
Yes, that's what I was talking about. Yeah, you can still find that. There's a document that's available. I think it's the National Archives where you can find that. You just do a quick search on Google, you'll find that. It's just you'll sit there kind of surprised.
Yeah.
By the Normans, huh?
Interesting. A few months later, in February 1777, Jefferson took a leading role in establishing a church in Charlottesville. Initial subscriptions were raised through a church called the Protestant Episcopal Church, but the name was changed to the Calvinistical Reformed Church. To the surprise of many, Jefferson is credited with having organized this congregation. While not an Orthodox Christian.
And they called him a deist. Wow.
Yeah, and while not an Orthodox Christian, his own claims give no credibility to being a deist. In a letter of January 9, 1816, sent to the former Secretary of the Continental Congress, Charles Thomson, Jefferson made a bold claim to be a follower of Christ. I too have made a wee little book from the same materials, which I call the Philosophy of Jesus. It is a paradigm of his doctrines made by cutting the text out of the book and arranging them on the pages of a blank book in a certain order of time or subject. A more beautiful or precious morsel of ethics I have never seen. It is documenting proof that I'm a real Christian. That is to say, a disciple of the doctrines of Jesus. Very different from the Platonists who call me infidel and themselves Christians and preachers of the gospel. Interesting. Of course, the Jefferson Bible is something very different to what people commonly claim that it is.
Yes.
Yeah. So now Jefferson versus Islam. I've got 3 slides and then I conclude. So these are paraphrases. These aren't not. I'm going to be paraphrasing from a couple of books. One of these is Captives, Britain, Empire and the World, 1600 to 1850 by Linda Colley, and another. And you can see the article link here if you want to have a look and see a bit more. So roughly 1.5 million Europeans, and that number could be as high as 4 to 5 million white Europeans, were enslaved in Islamic North Africa between 1530 and 1780. We don't have proper figures. So the number could be as high as 5 million. Now, do remember that the number of slaves recorded to have been taken on what they call the West Passage or the Atlantic Passage or whatever they want to call it today, that is from Africa to North America, and this includes Canada, is 350 to 500,000 blacks. So up to a maximum
And the
of
majority of those went to the Caribbean and South America, not to the
well,
United
no,
States.
we'll get to that. That of the 500,000,
Yeah.
so something like 14 million went to the Caribbean and South America, like 14 million. 500,000 at most went to Canada and North America. Now, notice here, of those American slaves, numbering at most 500,000, at least 3 times many were taken from Europe to Africa. And no one bats an eye over that. Black slavery, yeah, it's fine. No problems. So 1.5 million Europeans and Americans were enslaved in Islamic North Africa between 1530 and 1780. Miguel de Cervantes, who wrote the first novel, Don Quixote, was briefly in the galleys. What of the people of the town of Baltimore in Ireland? Muslim slave owners, Muslim slave pirates literally were attacking Greenland, Ireland, England, Denmark. They were going all across the world to steal slaves. So what did the Irish, now how are the Muslims going to say no? The Irish invaded Arabia and therefore it was revenge for attacking Hamas back in 1603. So what if Baltimore and Ireland all carried off by their Corsair raiders in a single night? So just, as I said, 2 more slides and we will finish. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams met with Tripoli's ambassador, Abdel Rahman, in March 1785, and he told them the Quran justified the Barbary states in making war on and enslaving non-Muslims. And this ambassador told them, the Libyan ambassador said, it is written in the Quran, all nations who do not acknowledge their authority, that's the authority of the Muslims, were sinners, that it was their right and duty as Muslims to make war upon whoever they could find and to make slaves of all that they could take as prisoners, and that every Muslim who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. I'd say this, oh my God, the Libyan ambassador was an Islamophobe. Don't you agree, Paul?
he's quoting their sources. They want to go to paradise. They have to kill them. They have to get themselves killed to go to paradise when they're fighting in jihad. Yes. Read their sources. That's the fun thing, to learn what they really want.
And the United States played no part in the Crusades or the Catholic Reconquista of Andalusia, that's Spain. The ambassador discussed his commission. He got money when America paid the demanded protection money. So he was benefiting financially. And this influenced Jefferson's decision to wage war on the Barbary states when he became president. In 1803, Tripoli... Yeah, go on.
Let's say, why pay somebody when you can let them know you're just as powerful and you don't want to pay? I mean, if you have the ability to stand up and say no, why not?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what fair turnabout is, fair play. On 31 October 1803, Tripoli achieved a significant capture of a new U.S. frigate called the Philadelphia. The triumph was short-lived because of the actions by Edward Preble and Stephen Decatur. They orchestrated a daring raid. These were Marines into Tripoli's harbor They destroyed the captured ship, and they inflicted considerable damage on the city's defenses, and they were celebrated as heroes. Lord Nelson called the raid the most bold and daring act of the age. Even Pope Pius VII declared that the United States had done more for the cause of Christianity than the most powerful nations of Christendom have done for ages, because they fought back against Muslim piracy. So now the author, what is interesting here, this is from City Journal, and the author writes, in his nostalgia for Lepanto, perhaps His Holiness was evidently unaware of the Treaty of Tripoli, which in 1797 had attempted to formalize the dues that America would pay for access to the Med, stated in its preamble that the United States had no quarrel with the Muslim religion and was in no sense a Christian country. We've covered that before. That was simply a diplomatic maneuver, and of course, the whole treaty, it turns out to be mostly garbage. At least the way that it's told to try to undermine the claim of being a Christian nation turns out to be garbage. We've covered that at length before in this series. So, of course, those secularists like myself, the author writes, who like to cite this treaty must concede that its conciliatory language was part of America's attempt to come to terms with Barbary demands. Even here, as an atheist, he admits that, yeah, that was a diplomatic maneuver. It wasn't worded to be accurate, it was worded to be conciliatory.
Yeah, because conceding was better than. Yeah, you don't want to give them money. You don't want to give them money. You don't know what they're going to use it for.
Yeah, and I'll finish my second last slide. So I'll finish here. So for 300 years, the Barbary pirates enslaved over 1 million Europeans. Again, potentially as many as 5 million. And Americans as well, by raiding ships, burning villages, and selling captives into servitude. 8 Marines eventually ended the white slave trade by challenging the pirate empire. So thank the Marines, thank the Americans as well for their contribution. From the 16th to the 19th century, these Barbary corsairs operated from North Africa, Muslims, targeting European and American vessels and even coastal towns as far as north as Iceland, capturing people for slavery. Why don't we talk about the Muslim slave trade, about Muslim piracy, Muslim aggression?
I'm kind of disgusted that it never gets mentioned. I brought it up at one point when I was teaching, and the kids were like, "What? What are you talking about?" I says, "Well, who do you think that the slavers bought the slaves from? They bought them from the Muslims. Like, what are you talking about? Why didn't we never hear about this before?" And like,
Crazy stuff.
it's because they don't want you to know they're hiding certain things from you, because you might begin to ask questions. Oh, yeah.
Right. So the pirates, these Muslim pirates from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, plundered cargo, enslaved crews, and they had coastal raids extending from Ireland to Iceland. They raided villages, they captured women and children and the elderly for slave in sale markets in Algiers and Tripoli, with a notable example being the abduction of nearly the entire population of the town of Baltimore in Ireland in 1631. What the heck were the Muslims doing raiding Ireland in 1631? What had the Irish done to them? So captives would face harsh labor. They were sold as concubines, meaning sex slaves, or were converted into soldiers for the Ottoman military. This sexual slavery seen here, this is real.
Yes.
This is real. This is real. This is what happened. The Barbary states demanded tribute from nations to avoid attacks on their ships, including the newly independent United States. And President Jefferson, taking office in 1801, said, "No, I'm not going to pay tribute anymore. I will no longer pay the jizya and be subdued." Why do you need to add pirates to Muslims? Isn't it implicit? Because you spend time around people, right, RKM? You know that people also aren't always very smart. So, and yeah, it's not politically correct to say that, because you can't say nasty things about brown people. So, being that I'm brown, I can't do that. Paul, any comment or thought?
I think it's interesting. We've always referred to them as the Barbary pirates. Nobody mentions them as being Islamic. I think if we would just go through the Islamic pirates, we'd be fine. But they've always been called the Barbary pirates. No mention of Islam, but that's the stuff that made them do what they wanted to do.
Yeah, it's based on Islamic ideology.
Yeah, and I think if we had said the Barbary Islamic pirates, Pirates, great. It was sad in 2001 that very few people knew Islam was the first enemy of the United States, of the constitutional United States. We fought the Brits before the Constitution. After the Constitution, our first enemy was Islam.
Yeah. I mean, they were predatory. The Muslims were predatory. You need to understand, and they just want to go back to that again. So yeah, these are Muslims who I think we need to be clear about this because they get a pass. It's all romanticized. And no, pirates are Jack Sparrow, white people from Europe. It's like, no, you actually really need to have a look at Muslim piracy, African Muslim piracy. And
then the vast amount of people that didn't live from this who went towards the Middle East. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's important to be explicit and clear about it and stop letting them get away with deception to try to minimize or whitewash this episode in history. And of course, when Jefferson said, no, I'm not paying you any money, Tripoli's Pasha Yusuf Karamanli declared war on the United States. So under Jefferson's leadership, the US Navy and Marines were deployed overseas for the first time to combat these Muslim states, the Barbary states, and there was a plan to strike at their heart in 1805. William Eaton, I discussed this at some length previously, and Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon, with a small force, including 8 Marines and 500 mercenaries, marched across the Libyan desert to capture Derna, launching their assault April 27, 1805. They were outnumbered, but they stormed into Derna, raised the American flag on foreign soil, and for the first time, and led to the liberation of American hostages and the decline of Barbary pirate operations. This victory at Derna forced Yusuf Karamanli to negotiate peace, and this peace was signed aboard the USS Constitution, and this gave free passage for American ships and ended the jizya payments and stopped active white slavery in the Barbary states. So this event marked a shift against piracy, with European powers beginning to strengthen their navies. Thank you very much, RK. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the good work. It says no, thank you. And they strengthened their navies. They rejected paying tribute, and O'Bannon's bravery was commemorated with the Mamluk sword, which is now a Marine Corps tradition. Finis for today. I'll end here. So America's first war was with the Muslims, because the Muslims declared war on the United States because they wanted slaves and pirate tribute, jizya. Yeah, I think America should have colonized the Barbary Empire. You're right. Paul, last word to you, and then I'll call it a day.
I think if you really want to take a look at faith, there's in the United States, get a hold of some of the original writings. And if you want to look at Islam and say, find out if they really were the leaders, there's a book called 6 Frigates that I highly recommend. Definitely want to pick that up. There's a whole bunch of original material in that book. You have to take a look at this is the beginning of the U.S. Navy. We really didn't have much. The Continental War was over. We weren't financed. If you look at this, we were trying to keep our expenses down. We could lose that. We could use a lesson like that today. It's 18.5 billion to it's just crazy, to terrorist states in the past 5 years. Crazy.
Yeah, J. Alfred Prufrock, interesting. This feels like forbidden knowledge, says a lot about the psychological prison of political correctness. Yeah, we need to break free. Facts, evidence, and let's make fun of these idiots who claim otherwise. There's a lot of, I would say, what's the word? Not to humiliate, there's a different word, to tease people that makes a difference. So guys, I'll call it a night here. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. I know you're a little tired. And so, guys, thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow. I will be on with Usama again and some other guests. We're going to talk about how do we evangelize to Muslims, because that is not always easy, but yeah, something worth discussing. So good night, Paul, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you to the audience.
All right. Bye.
Everyone.